You're watching Euronews Now with me, Sarah Green. Thanks for joining us. Our top stories this hour. Stalemate at security talks in Brussels as NATO rejects Russia's key demands, but diplomatic efforts continue today in Vienna. Is the party over for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson? He's under mounting pressure to resign after admitting he was at a Downing Street party while Britain was in strict lockdown. And Prince Andrew could end up in court this year after a New York judge rejects the British royal's bid to have a civil suit on sexual assault claims against him thrown out.
After 4 hours of tense talks, the US and NATO have rejected key Russian security demands for easing tensions over Ukraine, but are keeping the door open for future talks.
Together to increase mutual security.
Speaking to Euronews, the US Deputy Secretary of State had a message from Moscow.
Anything is possible in the world, but I will say this, it won't be about diplomacy failing. It will be about President Putin having made a choice that actually I think will bring great, great sorrow to his countrymen and women, because there will be great economic costs to Russia if they take this action. I think he knows that. There's enormous solidarity he will have heard this week, so he will know that we will be unified in imposing costs. If he makes the wrong choice, I hope he makes the right one.
Wendy Sherman told us she didn't expect to get instant answers from Russia this week, that her efforts are part of a series of, quote, critical and important dialogues that will continue Thursday in Vienna. In an interview with Euronews, a firm NATO Secretary-General said NATO would not be bowing to Russia's demands.
We are ready to agree on balanced and verifiable reductions in forces as part of conventional or nuclear arms control agreements, but we are not ready for one-sided reductions, and especially not in light of a significant Russian military buildup. Also, we have to understand that Russia is the aggressor. Russia has invaded Ukraine, occupied the part of Ukraine, Crimea, and continues to control or destabilize eastern Ukraine, Donbass.
Jens Stoltenberg told us there was still a real danger for an armed conflict in Europe. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Brussels.
Boris Johnson has issued an apology during a grilling at Wednesday's Prime Minister's questions. The Conservative leader explained that he thought the meeting on the 20th of May 2020 was a work event and spent 25 minutes in the garden before returning to the office. It happened during a time when the country was under strict lockdown regulations against COVID and therefore angered many.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I have learned enough to know that there were things we simply did not get right. And I must take responsibility.
He went on to explain that the garden was an extension of the Downing Street office, but he did acknowledge that he should have done things differently. The opposition leader Keir Starmer says it's a worthless apology.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there we have it. After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
However, Boris Johnson made no mention of stepping down. He only reiterated that everyone should wait for the results of the independent inquiry. Meanwhile, a High Court judge says that the UK government's operation of a VIP lane for suppliers of PPE equipment during the pandemic was illegal.
British royal Prince Andrew will face a civil lawsuit in the United States over allegations he sexually assaulted an underage girl. A New York judge on Wednesday rejected Andrew's bid to have the case thrown out. Virginia Giuffre is taking the prince to court over accusations he abused her when she was 17 years old. She says she was trafficked by the late convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, a friend of the prince. Epstein's ex-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, also a friend of the prince, was convicted by a US court last month on sex trafficking charges. Our reporter Susan Tehrani has more from New York.
Really a last-ditch effort on the part of Prince Andrew and his lawyers to try to pause this case. First, it was an attempt to claim that Virginia Giuffre doesn't live in the United States. She's not a citizen. That didn't go through. And for the second time, it was this attempt to say that a settlement had been reached between Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre back in 2009. And perhaps that was a cause to throw this case away. It did not work. The judge today said that in the ruling part of the case, it said, quote, this lawsuit alleges discrete incidents of sexual abuse in particular circumstances at 3 identifiable locations. It identifies to whom it attributes that sexual abuse, end of quote. So at this point, Prince Andrew has until July 14th to potentially answer questions under oath. And if a settlement is not reached, the trial will go to court and a jury trial will take place later this year.
The UK has reported nearly 400 new deaths from COVID. It's the second day in a row that the daily figure has hit an 11-month high. Wednesday's number hasn't been reached since February the 24th last year, when 442 deaths were reported. The WHO has urged people not to be complacent.
While Omicron causes less severe disease than Delta, it remains a dangerous virus, particularly for those who are unvaccinated.
Denmark is to offer a fourth coronavirus vaccination to vulnerable citizens as it faces record infection numbers from the Omicron variant. However, the European Union's drug regulator has expressed doubts about the need for a fourth dose and said there was currently no data to support this approach. Switzerland is to halve its quarantine time to 5 days to tackle its wave of COVID infections that's threatening to derail the economy. The reduction comes into effect from today. The government says it's possible because the Omicron variant has a shortened time between infection and transmission. And in France, schools have closed their doors ahead of a nationwide strike. Teachers are frustrated with what they say is the constant changing of COVID rules by the government. Testing and isolation requirements for potential COVID cases are disrupting classes, making teaching unmanageable.
Just as COVID cases hit a daily new record of over 7,000 in Bulgaria, the government is facing a backlash over COVID passes. Hundreds of protesters organized by the nationalist party Revival tried to force their way into the building where members of parliament sit.
We don't know how long the policemen will be able to hold back the protesters. They are trying to invade the parliament.
A week ago, Bulgarian authorities decided that nobody could enter the parliament building without a COVID certificate. In response, the leader of the Nationalist Party said he would bring thousands of supporters to disrupt the session. Some protesters arrived in the capital in specially organized transport from other parts of the country.
We don't want a COVID certificate. It doesn't protect. I've been sick with COVID and I think it's not so dangerous. Vaccines are useful, but not these ones.
Where are you from?
Russia.
How did you come to Sofia?
By bus.
Did you pay for it?
No, it was paid.
The leader, Kostadin Kostadinov, and members of his party have called the vaccines experimental liquids. However, it's claimed a third of them possess a COVID certificate and, in fact, have been vaccinated. Kostadinov was quarantined after being in contact with the Speaker of the Parliament, who tested positive for COVID. He didn't come to the protest, but it did not stop his supporters from responding to his call to disrupt the proceeding. Several people, including police officers, were injured. Among those arrested was one carrying a gun.
Stay with us on Euronews now for more on the stories making the news in Europe and beyond.